Good morning, everyone. I'm Pallavi Ade, along with Shreyas Deshmukh. We are the co-founders of Asian Pathfinders, and we are glad to be back with our sessions with the Department of Geopolitics and IR at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. It's always a pleasure to work with Anand and the entire team. So thank you again, Anand. So today's session is I2U2. For the ones who don't know, India, Israel, UAE, and USA have come together to form a quad in the Middle East, regionalism, a different way of connecting these countries. So today we have two amazing speakers, Dr. Muddassir Quamar and Mr. Mohammed Baharoon, who will be talking about this topic, and Nadeem will be moderating. So just before I hand it over to Nadeem, a brief about us, Asian Pathfinders. We started in 2020 in the height of the first lockdown, actually. And our way is to connect people across geographies or to bring together these people on various topics. So today we have on I2U2, we've had sessions last week on the China-Taiwan tensions which are happening, and we've had some different sessions on a variety of topics. The aim is to have these multidisciplinary dialogues and discussions. And this is a forum for everyone. So please write to us if you have any feedback or any sessions you'd like to see or any speakers you'd like to see. So please do write to me or Shreyas. Our email addresses are here. And moving on to today's session. So we have Nadeem Ahmed Moonakal, who will be moderating the session. So I have the pleasure to introduce Nadeem. Nadeem is a Dr. TMA Fellow and a PhD candidate at the Department of Geopolitics and IR at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. His doctoral thesis focuses on the linkages between identity complexities and regional political and security dynamics in the Middle East. He's a former South Asia and Middle East defense analyst at Jane's IHS Market and a former visiting researcher at the Center for Arab West Report, Cairo. He was also a visiting scholar at the Al-Quds Center for Political Studies in Amman, Jordan. Nadeem regularly writes on various think tanks and publications in the Middle East and South Asia, and his work focuses on the emerging geopolitics of the Middle East. So over to you, Nadeem.
Thank you, Pallavi. Good morning, everyone. Let me at the outset commend the efforts of the Department of Geopolitics, MAHE, and Asian Pathfinders to organize such a timely event, and also thank you for inviting me for this event. Although we have heard about I2U2 in various media outlets, very few in-depth discussions have been conducted on the prospects, nature, and scope of this unique grouping. And just a brief about how this I2U2 grouping started. The grouping initially was intended to facilitate provisions for the country to prepare for a post-oil and gas economy, and the member states of the grouping has come together to cooperate on converging areas that would complement each other's capacity. I'm sure the speakers would shed more light on this. The domains largely that the cooperation have been speculated is in the connectivity, public health services, environmental sustainability, alternate energy, and also by getting together all the private sector capital and expertise of the member states. Initially, the meeting was between the foreign ministers of India, Israel, the US, and UAE in October last year. And the vision of the group was to strengthen the economic engagement, as mentioned earlier, by identifying key areas of shared interest. And the context, of course, was the Abraham Accords, and which paved way for the normalization of ties between Israel and several Arab countries in the last 2 years. UAE has especially engaged with Israel on very important and vital issues. And very recent reports indicate that they are also involved in developing unmanned military and commercial vessels. At least that's the proposal that's at hand. And some reports also indicate that the UAE has invested nearly $100 million in Israel's growing technology sector. If you look at the bilateral initiatives as well, the member states have taken a very progressive trajectory in the last couple of years. Several reports indicate that the bilateral trade between India and UAE is nearly $59 million USD, and UAE features as one of India's top trading partners right now. And the bilateral relations between UAE and Israel as well has attracted considerable momentum post the ratification of Abraham Accords. Also, the signing of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between India and the UAE and the Free Trade Agreement between UAE and Israel are noteworthy to be pointed out here, especially while discussing the prospects of I2U2 as a grouping. Another interesting development is also that the Adani Ports and Special Economic Zone from India and Israel's Gadot Group won the bid to privatize the port of Haifa, which is a very strategic port. And as per the official statement, by winning the bid, the consortium has secured the rights to buy 100% shares of Haifa port, and the concession period of the port remains up to 2054. And space cooperation also features as something that probably we have to look at in the coming years. Just to give a brief context as well, as the regional political and security dynamics in the Middle East or West Asia keeps changing right now, most of the regional powers in West Asia seems to augment their strategic autonomy and try to find mechanisms to increase cooperation with Russia and China. But however, the traditional security partner, US, is still a key player in the region, and Washington realizes the strategic importance of its partners and allies, and with the formation of I2U2 and the Negev Forum, the US emphasizes its support for peace and normalization arrangements with Israel. At least that's the indication, and that's the intent that we get from Washington so far. There are so many questions with respect to what the future trajectory of I2U2 would be, what would, if the minilateral can expand beyond the scope of economy and energy, and what the nature of the involvement of member states would be in shaping the future political and security dynamics of the region. We would come to that, and I hope the speakers would also shed light on that. On that note, let me end it here, and let me introduce and welcome the first speaker for the session, Mr. Mohammed Baharoon. It's a pleasure to have you here on board. Mohammed Baharoon is the Director General and co-founder of the Dubai Public Policy Research Center. He began his career in media, working as a reporter for Ittihad newspaper before becoming an editor for Gulf Defense magazine. He then worked as Deputy Director of Watani, an initiative launched in 2005 to promote Emirati national identity. He also helped found the Brussels-based Bussola Institute, a think tank dedicated to studying EU-GCC relations. His research largely focuses on the emergence of the Arabian Peninsula as a geostrategic hub and the international relations of the Gulf states. He holds a master's degree in English literature from Texas Tech University. It's a pleasure to have you here on board. I would request you to take the screen, and the space is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadeem, and thank you all for being here this morning and for the kind invitation. I have a number of questions that I wanted to share with you. These were the questions that we were, sort of dealing with upon the announcement of the I2U2. And first question, and I'm sure most of you must have had to grapple with these questions at some point, is what is it? What is I2U2? What is this type of formation? And to me, the most obvious thing is that, one, it's a coalition of the willing. There's 4 countries. Each of them have got certain attitude to this, towards the region, certain understanding towards the region and to the global challenges. And none of these 4 were selected. None of them were forced. They were all willing to join. So it's a coalition of the willing. And I think this is an important aspect that would possibly shape the way groups, formations, platforms are going to develop in the future. The second thing, that it is a cooperative formation, which means there is no superlative power. There is no one leading nation that comes in and says, hey guys, you come and join me now, and I will offer you this and this and that. It's a cooperative formation. And it's quite telling that the US sort of wanted to be at the end rather than at the beginning, which is possibly the continuation of the leading from behind type of approach. And the third thing is that all of the 4 countries have got a strong strategic partner on a bilateral level. So the UAE and India have got a strategic partnership. The UAE and Israel have signed the Abrahamic Accord, but recently on bilateral formation, they've signed a free trade agreement. And UAE and the US has always been very long strategic partners. I don't need to talk a lot about the strategic partnership between the US and Israel, but also India is becoming even more important to the US since COVID, and now even with the competition with China. So this was the first idea. Yes, the title was catchy. The acronym, so to speak, had its own power. But we are always thinking about I2U2 and beyond, which is, I think, an important feature we will talk about. The second thing is that what brings all of these countries together, of course, we've talked about the strong bilateral relations between both of them, but they also have new emerging interests. US has a new emerging interest in the Indian Ocean. It has a new emerging interest in its competition with Russia and China. Israel has got a new emerging interest in being connected to the world after a long period of being boycotted by its neighbors. And the third one, that there is a very strong drive for connectivity. And connectivity is, again, is a new force that is coming up in international relations, and maybe we'll talk about this later on. And again, people talk about motives. So what are the motives? What are the benefits for the four countries? And in my view, and again, I want to say this, I'm speaking as an analyst, just like everyone here in the room. I'm not speaking in any official capacity. So I'm providing a reading of what is happening rather than a story from inside, if you want. So this is an economically led coalition. This is not a coalition that is based on ideology or security, which is a part of which we will come to. But this is an economically led coalition, which is a new way of creating formations in the region. If you look at the GCC, if you look at the way the US has always treated the region, it was oil versus, and security dichotomy rather than a more of a strategic partnership. And also the benefit of such a formation is that it contributes to major global issues. The issues that people are talking about are food security, energy security, global warming, trade. So these are global issues, not only bilateral or even regional. There's a strong knowledge transfer component into this discussion, which is again a driver for knowledge economy, which is India is emerging as a major provider for. And the risks, of course, well, this is not a classical alliance. There is, for instance, no common enemy. And I think this is an important issue for the four, and possibly it might be a risk, but also might be a stabilizing element that will take it forward. It has no common ideology also. Not all of the countries share the same religion or ideological stance. And of course, there's no immediate geographical boundaries between the four countries. So that in geopolitical formations is usually seen as a weak point rather than a strength point. Also, there hasn't been a successful predecessor to this formation. For instance, the Quad, which was formed earlier, but came out in force towards the beginning of COVID, was seen as had a function which is working against the Chinese vaccine diplomacy, and that didn't even go very far. And of course, there is the overall strategic viewpoint, which is it is happening at a time of extreme polarization, and on the Ukraine issue and on the Taiwan-China issue. And it would be very difficult not to slip into one side or another, and that's part of the risks. But with risks comes potential. What are the potentials for that? There is a potential for a global economic connectivity. Connectivity, as we see it, is based on movement of goods, including energy, oil and gas, movement of money, movement of people, and movement of data. And this distance between, the lack of geographical boundaries or proximity for the four countries would become here a major advantage, because that's how you build connectivity, not to things that are close to you, but to things that are far to you. Also, it starts on new areas of cooperation instead of security cooperation on hard security. Now we're talking about a food corridor, food security corridor, and I think that is a new area that people are trying to look. And it goes beyond the immediate interest of the countries and its immediate neighborhood. And of course, it is an expandable forum. This alliance can expand easily, especially because as you build in connectivity, you will need those nodes, and you will need to build that connectivity. And in my views, countries like South Korea, Singapore, Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Morocco are all possible connectivity nodes that could become. So that's why we're talking about I2U2 and beyond. And if I want to talk about the UAE, what motivates it? It's part of its global connectivity agenda, as I've just described. And it's a drive, it's part of its drive to diversify its knowledge economy. That's the type of tech partnership that we will need to build in new ways of catering to food and water security, and also to renewable energy. It's an economy-led coalition. It's not a political formation. And part of the UAE 50's agenda and values, principles, economy leads on political issues. So again, that fits within its direction. It also continues the mode of cooperation rather than de-escalation. That's the strategy that it has held recently, that led to the Abraham Accords and led to even expanding relationship with India, as well as with Turkey and others. So I think that is the motivation for the UAE, and I will stop over there at that. Hopefully that I did not surpass the 12 minutes I was given. Thank you.
Thank you, Baharoon. You just finished on time. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights. Those were very interesting views. We will take a couple of questions on that later. But for now, let me introduce the next speaker that we have. We have Dr. Muddassir Quamar. It's a pleasure to introduce him this panel. Dr. Quamer is an associate fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. He holds a PhD in Middle East Studies from JNU. His doctoral thesis focused on social dynamics in Saudi Arabia and the context of tensions between two seemingly non-harmonious trends, the Islamization and modernization. He has a wider interest in Gulf societies, political Islam, Middle East geopolitics, and India's relations with the Middle East. He has co-authored two books, India's Saudi Policy, Bridge to the Future, and Persian Gulf 2019, India's Relations with the Region. Both were published by Parrikar Macmillan. He has also co-edited several books and publications, and he has published articles in various academic journals as well. I have a long list in front of me, so I'm trying to cut it short. Dr. Quamar has also been associated with the Middle East Institute, New Delhi in various capacities since early years of its foundation, including serving as the associate editor of its flagship journal, The Contemporary Review of the Middle East, published by Sage India. On that note, let me invite Dr. Muddassir Quamar, and the screen is yours.
Thank you, first of all. Thank you, Nadeem, for such a kind introduction. It's rather, sometimes rather embarrassing to have such a long introduction. I'm no stranger to the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. And it's always a pleasure to be back, even though virtually, at the Institute and interact with the students and faculty at the Institute. So I'm glad to be back here. Thank you, Asian Pathfinders, Shreyas, Pallavi, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to interact with, students and faculty who are part of the Asian Pathfinders. And I would also commend you for doing a very good job in terms of, spreading the discussions on issues related to IR and geopolitics in India to a wider spectrum of audience. So on that note, let me come to the issue of discussion today, the I2U2. You know, when initially the discussion came in October last year, when our foreign minister was in Israel and this quadrilateral meeting happened, which was actually the beginning of this I2U2. A lot of discussion was about whether it would be a Middle East Quad or a mini Quad, you know, so on and so forth. There were West Asia Quad and many other, you know, kind of names that was given to this, you know, rather unilateral initiative. But in April this year, United States announced that it is going to be I2U2. So initially, I mean, it rather sounded a bit cheesy, you know. Sometimes perhaps the State Department officials who came up with this name or who coined this name, perhaps watch a lot of Hollywood rom-coms, maybe. So, but anyways, I think it has picked up quite well in the sense that it also gives you know, reflects on what exactly this initiative is. And as I would completely agree with Mr. Baharoon, who said that it's a coalition of willing. I completely agree with that. I mean, it is actually indeed a coalition of willing. And despite all the discussion around it, at the core of it, it is actually a geopolitical, geo-economic initiative, not really necessarily. I mean, obviously, you cannot disassociate itself with geopolitics, but at the core of it, what exactly is the agenda? What is the intentions of these four countries? It is geoeconomics. So on that note, I have around 5-6 points. I'll try and make those points in the next, you know, 8 to 10 minutes, and then I'll be very happy to have questions and discussions. That would be, I think, more fruitful. So let me, at the first point, I think it is important to look at it from the Indian foreign policy or India's Middle East policy point of view. So what does this indicate about India's policy towards the region? You know, if you look at the literature, if you look at the discussion, most of the people have been telling us that, you know, India does not really has a Middle East policy. And it is true also in a sense, it was true, in the sense that we had very good relations with all the Middle Eastern countries, whether in the Gulf, all the 6 GCC countries, especially UAE and Saudi Arabia, Oman, to an extent Iran as well. There has been some problems in the last few years. And then other countries as well, whether it is Jordan, Israel, Egypt, and so on. So we had very good bilateral relations. What this I2U2 tells us is that there is a broader contour of India's Middle East policy emerging. So what this, and obviously the fine prints are yet to be kind of become very clear. But what this broader contour is, the broader contour is that India is willing to partner with all the countries in the region who are interested in geoeconomics, who are ready to work with, you know, India and other international powers, regional powers, for capacity building, for connectivity, as Mr. Baharoon was talking about, for building, capitalizing on the strengths of different countries. So basically, if I have to put it in one term, in a nutshell, for human security. And that is something very, very important because, and that is my second point, because if you look at the region in the last decade or so, it has suffered significantly with so many problems. I mean, Arab Spring obviously was one manifestation of the challenges facing the region. But if you go back also, I mean, look at the Arab development reports in 2002, 2003, you know, the basic problem, I'm sorry for the noise, the background noise, I'll try to, you know, cut that out. So the basic premise is that the people have aspirations and those aspirations were not being fulfilled. whether it is about employment, whether it is about life standard of life, whether it is about everything else, freedom of expression, whether it is about ability to grow in terms of realize their potentials individually and collectively. That is something which was not happening because of regional tensions. Different states are not able to work with each other. There are ideological problems. There are, tensions, conflicts, terrorism, so on and so forth. And then obviously repression from, regimes which are not necessarily very amenable to any kind of dissent. So within that context, if one looks at it, this, I think, is a template which gives us a hope, a ray of hope, that different countries can actually come together and work on their strengths, do connectivity, build infrastructure, engage in trade, engage in people-to-people contacts, understand each other, build trust with each other. And this is where it builds on the I2U2 builds on the Abraham Accords. So if you look at the Trump administration, there were lots of disastrous moves that were initiated under the Trump administration, but one of the very fruitful, I would say, and I think, I don't know whether one can call it visionary, but I think it will have a very long-term positive implication, was the Abraham Accords. The normalization of relations between, initiative was between UAE and Israel, and other countries also joined, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. This is something which the I2U2 builds on. And that's why we have the Egyptian scholar who was actually the first one to call it the Indo-Abrahamic Accords, Mohammed Suleiman. So this I2U2 is basically Indo-Abrahamic Accords. It builds on the Abrahamic Accords and creates a new template for regional cooperative mechanism. And I think that is something which is very important to underline. We can obviously discuss on these issues during question and answer session. Now, the third point is about, let me just make a little point about geopolitics. Now, this is something which is important in terms of the interaction between the region and the outside world. What would be the template for the interaction, whether it would be about hegemony, whether it would be about domination by outside powers, whether it would be about creating tensions? I think what I2U2 tells us, and this is where India's approach also comes into limelight, that rather than creating, and again, I would refer to the previous speaker's point, that rather than creating tensions, rather than creating, upmanship, rather than having hegemonic interaction, this creates a kind of equal interaction between different powers who are willing. And this is where it is also important to note that if other countries are also willing to come and join the agenda of I2U2, of geoeconomics, I think there would not be any problem if other countries also join, whether regional powers or international powers. But obviously, the elephant in the room, the two elephants in the room are Iran and China. Russia, obviously is a factor, but it's not so much when it comes to, I would say, the I2U2 at this stage. Is it actually a formation, a unilateral initiative that is targeting these two countries? There has been some parallel drawn between the Indo-Pacific Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, and how that developed into a more kind of, policy to contain China and so on. There is also obviously the point about the Iranian, agenda in the region of militarization, of expansionism, whether it counters that. I think at this stage, it is important to note that if you look at the official documents, the discussions, it's only about geoeconomics. The only other thing which has been mentioned specifically at once was maritime security, which is again a collective agenda. But obviously, if you, it also does something. It does joins the strength of various countries in trying to tell the regional powers and international powers that, look, we are here, we mean business, we are here with a positive agenda, there is no negative agenda, and hence let's move forward in that direction rather than towards a negative agenda. So that is about the regional and international interaction. Now let me also slightly go into the specifics, specifically about we have had three so far discussions. The first was in October between foreign ministers. The latest one was the summit meeting, the first summit meeting in July. In between, when India-US 2+2 dialogue happened, there was also a mention of I2U2 at that point of time. So there are 6 issues that have very specifically been mentioned in this meetings that can be distilled through these meetings. What are these? The first is water. Cooperation for improving the, water is a very, very important commodity. And if you look at the Middle East, it is largely a arid region. And there are lots of problems, not only because of the geography, but also because of change in weather patterns. Suddenly you have a news about floods in Oman and UAE. I mean, countries which were earlier, even today, there is not much rains throughout the year, but suddenly you have a kind of cloudburst kind of a situation. Similarly, there are other problems. So water is one very important issue. Then obviously energy. Here, clean energy and green technologies have been emphasized. Then transportation, that is physical connectivity between countries and modernization of infrastructure, building of infrastructure to be able to connect different countries so that they can engage in trade and other economic activities. And healthcare is very important, obviously, in the backdrop of the COVID-19 and the vaccination issue as such. But larger, the issue of health is also important and emphasized. There is also an emphasis on the issue of cooperation at the level of space. So space, is gradually, or in fact, increasingly becoming a very important part of the global geopolitical and international politics agenda. And this is also something which the I2U2 emphasizes on as far as cooperative mechanism is concerned. And then food security, which is again very important. I mean, everybody is aware of the kind of food security, the lack of food security that prevails, or that often the countries in the region face. With the Ukraine crisis, this has become even more profound, and that is something which is important to note. Now, if you look at the summit meeting, clean energy and food security have been emphasized during this. So you have about, discussion about UAE investing in India, and then, Israeli technology and American expertise and all that. And then obviously the same can be talked about renewable energy. So this is about, obviously, the post-oil economy is also in the backdrop of this idea. So this is mainly, in a nutshell, what exactly is the emphasis. So if you look at it, there is no discussion about containing China, containing Iran, or conflicts and all that, which are there. It is not that these countries would not be discussing it, but the focus is on geoeconomics, human security. So let me, conclude here by saying this, that in my understanding, to the best of way I have been looking at the region, this is a very, very promising initiative. I would emphasize on the word promising. It is a very promising initiative with immense potential. And I would also say that this perhaps could be a template that, if succeeds, and I would put my bet on it succeeding because of the intent which I have noticed so far, that if it succeeds, it will lead to further replication at multiplication, its multiplying effect on the region, and obviously other countries who are part of it, US, India, and I mean, other region as well, we might see such replication happening with this, this kind of unilateral initiatives. So I would say that this is a very, very significant move, and I would stop here and would be very happy to take questions from anywhere.
Thank you, Dr. Muddassir. That was indeed an intriguing presentation. I also thank you for sharing insights about the I2U2 from the Indian perspective as well. Before opening the discussion for the students, I have a couple of questions which both of you can answer. The first one is quite straightforward, but I would try to, you can choose to answer it in the way that you want to. How do you speculate the future of I2U2? I mean, you have both have emphasized repeatedly that this is a geo-economic grouping, and it is not intended for security or defense or military domains, but there is a growing concern regarding China and Iran, which Dr. Muddassir also mentioned. And would the scope of the group be limited to geo-economics, or do you see a scope where it can expand beyond geoeconomics? Probably Dr. Muddassir can start, and probably then Dr. Baharoon, Mr. Baharoon also can pitch in his views.
Thanks, Nadeem. I think that's a very important question. I mean, if one looks at the future and in terms of how it might evolve, it would be really, to be very fair, it would be very difficult to actually say that this is the way forward. This would be the way forward, and there can be no security, angle emerging within the I2U2. But I would say that there are two aspects to it. One is obviously, which has become very clear, that the agenda, the focus is on human security, and it is likely to grow. That part is certainly likely to grow. It will grow. And if I have to put my money on it, I would say that perhaps there would be more regional countries, especially the smaller countries, would be interested in joining specifically with the agenda on human security, because that is something which is very, very important from the regional point of view. Now, if one looks at the geopolitics, as I mentioned during my presentation, that is the latent part. That is very much there. I mean, one cannot completely, kind of ignore that part or not take that into account. There is just one point I would, mention. Without regional stability, without regional security, without, I mean, if there is a conflict, how do you provide human security? I mean, how does geoeconomics work? If there is no security, there is no stability. So that part is very much there. And if you look at the three countries, these are US, Israel, regional countries I'm talking about in US, Israel and UAE, and then external is US and India. India is the only country which has so far been away from regional security cooperations. And all three are very much involved in trying to create some kind of regional security architecture. I mean, they might not have succeeded, but they have been making effort. So that part is very much there. And that is where I was saying in the beginning that there is a, shift in India, how India approaches the region. It is no longer about, just bilateral relations. We want the region to be more stable. Obviously, the Indian, think tank, the Indian policy think tank is about human security and regional, capacity building. But obviously, one cannot completely disassociate that from regional security and stability. So I think that is something which is important.
Thank you, Dr. Muddassir. Baharoon, if you may like to comment on that.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Quamar mentioned the word template. maybe you could look at it as even a prototype if you want. But both ideas actually leads to expansion. If it's a template, that means others can use it. If it's a prototype, and then it will go for production. So I think the future, and I'm not a betting man, but I would join Dr. Muddassir as well in betting that it will succeed. It will succeed because of the difference of its approach, because it avoids the problems and the pitfalls of polarization that we're seeing. But we were thinking about what can actually give it life. This is a new formation. It has a predecessor that didn't really achieve much. So how can we make it work differently? And me and other colleagues, Dr. Jalandra from the Anwar Gargash Academy and Dr. Gadaya Afterman from the Abba Ibn Institute in Israel have sort of written a co-authored a piece talking about blue economy as a way of making this or gelling this type of agreement or formation. Basically, because in our view, blue is the next green. It will address those global issues of global warming because of the capacity of retaking some of the carbon dioxide in there through algae and microalgae technology. But also it would help with food security. But most importantly, it will help with the connectivity. The problem with this, or the possible problem with this formation, is that we've got the US, which is on the Atlantic Ocean, and of course on the Pacific, and we've got Israel, which is on the Mediterranean and partly on the Red Sea. We've got the UAE, which is on the Arabian Gulf, but also in the Arabian Gulf. The Arabian Sea, and we've got India on the Indian Ocean. They're far apart from each other. But if we look at blue economy as a way of connectivity, then that will work for them, not against them. So again, these are. I'm happy to share the article that also appeared in India Times and other. India Tribune and another outlets in India. But again, this is a way of looking at what are the shortcomings and where we can overcome it. And if you look at this particular angle, you will see that this type of connectivity will invite more people to join in. Basically, if we were talking about connectivity through the sea, which is right now biggest part of planet Earth, but also a huge mine for helping us when it comes to food security, to water security, to renewable energy, and other ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Baharoon. We have got a bunch of questions from some of the attendees. I would start with Pallavi's question. She asked, the Quad has put emphasis on clean energy. However, these 4 countries have different energy agendas and are at different stages of switch to clean energy. Also, as the Quad grows to have other members with their own energy agendas, how can the energy goals be achieved with possible conflicting agendas of the member states? Either of you may answer that. Maybe Dr. Muddassir can start. And
I'll just say very briefly. Actually, I mean, it's true that all the 4 countries are at different stages of kind of adopting a clean energy agenda, which is very normal, which is very obvious. I mean, obviously, different countries' size. If you look at the size of economy, it will not be. I mean, one cannot really expect that suddenly there would be switch to clean energy. It would be a gradual process, but what is important is it is inevitable. We have to do it. There is no other way out. To switch to clean energy is no longer a luxury. It's no longer just an option there. It is now a necessity for everyone, whether it is India, whether it is UAE, whether it is Israel, whether it is US, or whether it is any other country in the world. Look at the kind of weather pattern, and the natural disaster, the number of increasingly happening. And so it is it will take time. It will happen gradually. Different countries will take their own time, and it is not possible to suddenly change it. Every country suddenly at one time change to it, clean energy agenda completely. What is important at I2U2 is it makes capacity building for switching to cleaner energy a very important part of its agenda. So every country has different capacities, different technological, they are at the different technological advancements in terms of, for example, look at the UAE. I mean, if you go to the way clean energy has been prioritized in the UAE's energy policy, I mean, it is mind-boggling. Or other countries as well, even Saudi Arabia, if you look at it, very fast trying to switch because they realize more than other countries how important it is to do it. Look at India. I mean, we have floated the Solar Alliance. There is already a emphasis on. There is already a project has been launched in the sense of already initiated about wind and solar energy field in Gujarat, according to I2U2 first summit meeting. So capacity building, bringing different forces together to help each other, that is something which is what I2U2 does. So that is a point which should be noted here.
Right. I have, since we are running out of time, I'm trying to take a couple of more questions. Okay, so Dr. Muddassir also has talked about the human security aspect of it. So do you think it is likely for I2U2 to bring about a regional cooperative mechanism, especially considering the fact that the region is stuck with a lot of protracted conflicts and lingering conflicts? And for any development in human security aspect, of course, a regional cooperative mechanism would be essential. And how do you think you can place it in the current context?
I mean, I would definitely agree that this is both one of those risks and potentials for the I2U2. This fact that there are a lot of conflicts, and this is a sort of a cooperative agreement or formation that is trying to avoid those conflicts. I mean, the position of the UAE vis-a-vis Pakistan is not exactly the position of India, but we use that as a way of reducing it. Reducing that conflict. Same thing with position of the UAE towards Iran and Israel's position towards Iran is not exactly the same, but we're still using that to reduce the type of tension and de-escalate. So I think there is more into cooperation, bigger value that we haven't explored fully yet. And I think this is, but the very important issue is that the issue of security has been expanded to a larger framework of security. So Dr. Muddassir talked about human security, which involves, of course, food security and water security. And also with energy. I mean, if I would disagree slightly with Dr. Muddassir, is that the way we look at energy is that it is a priority for every country to develop. So we're not very biased towards one form of energy, but we're in for a more balanced approach to energy. The UAE has an energy mix type of a strategy where fossil fuel brings in with nuclear energy, with renewable energy, and also with conservative approach to usage. All of these lead to what we want to achieve. But we also think that for urbanization to happen, for people to live a decent life, for kids to go to school, for us to do the type of work that would achieve technological advancement, all of this is energy heavy, and we will need to provide energy. Dealing with the side effects of energy, including carbon, need also to get focused rather than preventing, say, and this is my view, preventing fossil fuel. We need to deal with way of carbon, carbon emissions. And part of it, in my view, the solution to that is, photosynthesis, what plants and how God has created them to do that. And we've got a lot that we can do through in the waters with algae.
Thank you, Baharoon. We have another question. Do you think that the Ukraine conflict has amplified the efforts for I2U2, especially considering the food insecurity that we see across the region right now? What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think if you look at the I2U2, the start of it, obviously it predates the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, but obviously when it comes to the food security, the situation has been deteriorated by the conflict in Ukraine. And this might lead to, other countries prioritizing food security. But I think I2U2 is not just about one conflict or one reaction to some development as such. It is a much broader agenda. It is, as I would agree with Mr. Baharoon also, that here the point is not about reacting to one situation. It's about creating a new template, creating a new, if one uses the term prototype, we'll have to see how it evolves. But that is the point. So obviously, the conflict in Ukraine has hastened the concern about food security globally, not only in the region, not only in the Middle East, but globally. So that is something which is important, but it should not be seen only as a reaction to one event.
Baharoon, please, you may comment on that.
Yeah, I would just add that everyone would look at it from a certain angle. And there is that possibility that the US would look at this and say, look, in the same way we've used India to produce, vaccines to counter the vaccines out of China, we would possibly use India as a major way of producing food to lower down the value of what the Russians called as the wheat road, similar to the Silk Road. That was their way of creating corridors of wheat. So maybe India could do that. That is a possibility. But from our point of view in the UAE, if we create a network of food security, it cannot be centric between two ports. Either Ukraine or Russia could not be the only providers of the vast majority of requirements around the world. We will need others, be it India, be it China, be it Sudan, be it Morocco. These are important countries, and we will need to develop that. And remember, UAE had a minister for food security before this issue of Ukraine and Russia. As Dr. Muddassir said, this is a much larger issue. We shouldn't be prioritizing a political angle to it at a certain point, because that would make it lose its value as a long-term strategic issue.
All right. I think I'll take one more last question. I'll combine a couple of questions if that's possible. Okay. What are the opportunities for India from I2U2, and will India's engagement with Middle East change in the context of I2U2, or how do you foresee that engagement in the near future?
Go ahead.
Yeah, please. We'll start with Dr.
I think that is a very thanks. So that is a very, I think, a very important question. Now, as far as the potentials and promises are concerned, as I mentioned at the beginning, it has immense potential with a specific specific relation to India, with a specific context to India. There are immense potential in terms of India's own need for, very rapid infrastructure building, very rapid, capacity building in different areas, whether it is waste management, whether it is water management, whether it is food security, whether it is, energy transformation, transition to cleaner energy. All these are very, very important. And for India, the potentials are immense. India has one advantage, two advantages. It is a huge, big economy, very big size. Secondly, it has a large demography. So it has a demographic dividend in terms of young demography. And they are, by and large, there is a skilled, youth very much there. It is true for the region also, for the Middle East region. The population, the demography is very young. So in that sense, there is a synergy between India and the region. And that is something which is very important. So if there is more investments in India from the region or from other parts of the world, from the US, if countries like Israel and the United States can bring their expertise and technological advancements to India, this is something which is very important for India to rapidly transform the challenges which it is facing, to address the challenges which it is facing. So I think from the point of view of I2U2, it presents immense potentials as far as India is concerned on this issue. As far as India's approach to the region is concerned, as I mentioned in the beginning, it is, in my opinion, it gives an idea that there is a change in Indian approach. India no longer looks at the region from only bilateral point of view. It recognizes the significance of collective cooperative mechanism. And this is one step, one of the first steps maybe. There are other, I could see there are other developments also taking place from the India's approach point of view. There is not much time to go into the details, but I would say that this certainly gives us an idea that India's approach towards the region is evolving and it is becoming much more comprehensive, if I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Muddassir. Baharoon, if I may just rephrase that question, how do you think UAE has been seeing India, and what are the capacity building measures or the complementary market skills or private enterprises that UAE seeks from India? Well, how do you see the partnership in the future? And how do you think UAE, in what terms do you think UAE expects India to cooperate in the future?
I think the very first project that was prioritized was a project in India. UAE have put a fund of about $2 billion into a project that was led into India. It was not in the US, it was not in the US. US and Israel have contributed. US from the private sector, I understand that the US is very heavy when it comes to formal movement. So it was easier to mobilize the private sector. But also Israel from its tech sector. And I think there is a huge partnership. But if I want to pretend to be today an Indian policymaker, and I want to look at the potential forward for India, I think a huge potential is not only within the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Huge potential would be creating a transformation in Egypt, which has very similar situation or circumstances to India. And I think I would hope for something like that to happen, some sort of a relationship between India and Egypt that would make Egypt become the India of the region when it comes to tech, when it comes to food, when it comes to using its human resources, maximizing on that human resources, with the positioning of Egypt and the positioning of India. And I think that's again a very important partnership. So again, this is one of those areas of expansion. If you want, I will go back to support Dr. Muddassir's idea of this is a coalition that can actually expand rather than collapse easily.
Thanks a lot, Baharoon. Thanks a lot, Dr. Muddassir. I think we are just, we have ended on time. We have managed to stick to time. I appreciate both the speakers and the organizers for their efforts. And I think it was a very fruitful discussion, especially considering the fact that there has been much discussion on I2U2, or very rarely you see in-depth discussions about I2U2. One of the reasons probably might be because it's at a nascent stage, and the several projects are still in the pipeline, and we are yet to see how it's going to pan out in the coming years. But I think, as both the speakers emphasize, that the prospects are huge. The ambitions and the willingness is on point. As Baharoon also mentioned, that there are real possibilities of expanding this to other member states and within the region and maybe beyond. But these things are yet to be seen, and probably we can hold one more session on in the coming years about the progress of I2U2, and that will be a very fruitful experience. I thank all the speakers. I thank the organizing members. I thank Asian Pathfinders and the Department of Geopolitics, MAHE as well. And of course, people who have gathered both online and offline to participate in the event. I appreciate their efforts. All the students who have been giving out questions on the chat box. Some of them I could take, some of them I couldn't because of the limitation of time. Nevertheless, it was a really enriching experience. I thank you all again, and I hope you have a very pleasant day ahead. Shukran jazeelan, Baharoon. Thank you, Dr. Muddassir.
Thank you.
Shukran.
Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, Nadeem, for wonderful moderation and keeping this session very engaged. And thank you so much for our speakers, Dr. Quamar and Mr. Baharoon, for joining us today on the weekend, giving their time. And thank you, Professor Anand, and all the students from MAHE. And have a nice weekend. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.